My name is Harry Torrance. I'm Professor of Education at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK. And I'm Director of the Education and Social Research Institute at Manchester Met. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about my recent paper in Discourse. The paper is called Blaming the Victim: Assessment, Examinations and the Responsibilisation of Students and Teachers in Neoliberal Governance. Responsibilisation is an idea that derives from the work of Michel Foucault on how modern societies come to be governed, and indeed come to be governable. Responsibilisation is used to describe and analyse the role that various aspects of social policy, including education, play in rendering individuals responsible for the outcomes of social and economic activity. Basically, the argument is that individuals are responsible not only for their own actions after the fact, that is, if something good or bad happens, we take responsibility for it, as we have always done. But increasingly, individuals are now supposed to take responsibility for their actions before the fact. In other words, it is now increasingly assumed that citizens have a responsibility to take appropriate action in advance to prevent social and economic harm occurring in the first place. And this is the core of the concept of responsibilisation. My paper takes this basic idea and explores it in the context of the increasing role that assessment and examinations play in modern education systems. Historically, for a period of 100 years or more, from around the 1860s to the 1960s, 1970s, assessment developed as an educational technology for selecting and certificating a small number of individual students. Education was a scarce good, and only a small proportion of the population was thought to be intellectually capable of benefiting from education and, in turn, becoming social and economic leaders in society. Access to educational opportunities was limited, and assessment was largely focused on selecting individuals for these limited opportunities. So the assessment process worked to exclude the majority from educational opportunity. And in the paper, I call this process the development of a technology of exclusion. More recently, however, over the last 40 to 50 years, since the 1960s, 1970s, the focus and purpose of assessment has changed. The emphasis is now on inclusion rather than exclusion. The emphasis is now on developing education and assessment for the so-called knowledge economy and as a form of investment in human capital. Policy now assumes that the overwhelming majority of the population can and should be educated to the highest level possible. The imperative is to treat education as an economic investment, both on the part of the individual student and on the part of government. And the paper identifies and describes these developments and analyses them as the development of what I call a technology of inclusion. Such inclusion, however, now means that the pressure to succeed is devolved all the way down the education system onto individual students, teachers, and indeed parents. Previously, educational failure was the assumed norm of the system. Most students did not succeed, but moreover, they were not expected to succeed. They might simply think of themselves as unlucky or somehow not suited to education and to academic work. It wasn't for them, and the majority would move into work, into manual jobs of various kinds. Now, however, the opportunity to progress through the school system and onto university is claimed to be available to all and for all. Indeed, to be an academic success is now seen to be a necessity if individuals and society as a whole are to fulfill their potential. All that is required to access these new opportunities is hard work from both students and teachers. So the paper argues that students and teachers have been responsibilised for the quality and outcomes of education, with assessment and examinations providing the quintessential vehicle for individualising and responsibilising success and failure in relation to educational achievement and social mobility. The policy rhetoric of the system is that everybody can succeed, so responsibility for failure now lies with the students themselves, in combination with poor teaching and even poor parenting. Those who do not succeed may no longer be categorised as incapable, but they and their teachers and their parents are categorised as disorganised, lacking in endeavour, lacking in ambition. So the argument of the paper is that lack of responsibility has replaced supposed lack of intelligence as the key explanatory variable in educational success and failure. Overall, the paper argues that we seem to have moved from using assessment to identify and certify the actual practical skills and competencies and educational achievements of individual students to a mass system of assessment and testing which focuses on the indicators of achievement, that is, test results and grades, rather than the quality of achievement itself. Moreover, this movement has been accompanied by an increasing emphasis on personal responsibility to engage with the system and maximise outcomes. Yet, the soft skills of collaboration, teamwork, creativity and so forth, which so often feature on lists of 21st century knowledge economy skills, these are not addressed at all in our current testing systems. So the paper moves on to ask whether or not assessment could be organised differently and focus on developing and identifying different outcomes. The paper concludes by reflecting on what assessment might look like if we focused more on collaborative activity, on the collaborative activity of teaching and learning, and if we emphasised the shared responsibility of students and teachers to develop skills and understandings collaboratively together. The paper argues that responsibilisation at the level of the individual will not be easily reversed, but education and its attendant assessment processes and procedures must be seen as a collective responsibility, a collective endeavour, maximising success, minimising failure where we can, but above all recognising that both success and failure are co-produced as part of a collaborative process in action and in context. Thus, outcomes can change over time as circumstances and the nature of the educational encounter itself changes.